back to the presentation. McKinney Vento 101, understanding and implementing the law in Wisconsin. I'm so glad you joined. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Christina Dukes. I'm founder and principal of Pearl Strategies, an education consulting firm based in the Washington, D.C. area. I started Pearl Strategies earlier this year. That was kind of a big move for me. But prior to starting Pearl Strategies, I worked at the National Center for Homeless Education, the U.S. Department of Education's Federal Homeless Education Technical Assistance Center for 18 years. And so I've been a practitioner and been part of the field of homeless education for many years, and hope to bring whatever knowledge I can to today's conversation. Here's where we're headed. I do want to share a little bit of information with you about what research tells us about the relationship between education and homelessness. And there is a very clear bi-directional relationship, and we'll unpack what that means. Then we're going to move into the meat of the discussion, which is understanding and implementing the McKinney Vento Act. If you're in this session, you likely are relatively new to your position, or maybe you feel like it's time for a refresher for those basics. And so that's what we're going to talk about. I do want to say there's plenty of information to get out, but I know it's not the most engaging thing to just sit and listen to someone talk for 75 minutes. So please keep it fun, keep it engaging. When we stop for Q&A, feel free to unmute, or certainly keep the chat going. Drop your questions, your comments in the chat. And there'll be a couple of discussion questions that I pose to you as well. So I hope you'll be active in the discussion. Let's get started. Let's look and see what the research tells us on the relationship between education and homelessness. Well, actually, first I wanted to mention this rural versus non-rural issue. So what you'll see over the next couple of slides is research from Chapin Hall at the University of Chicago, their initiative called Voices of Youth. They undertook a national large-scale research initiative on youth and young adults experiencing homelessness. And so what we'll see over the next several slides are some of their findings. One of the things that they found that I think is particularly relevant for most states, but including Wisconsin, that has some urban centers, but also plenty of rural areas, is that they found that rates of youth homelessness are statistically identical in rural and non-rural areas. Now, the numbers themselves will be larger in population centers. There are more people who are living there, and so we're likely to see more people experiencing homelessness in those areas. But also know that homelessness is something that happens at about the same rate in rural and non-rural areas alike. So if you're in a rural community, know that this is happening in your area. It just might be a little more hidden. Chapin Hall found that there are 6 subpopulations of youth that are at a higher risk for homelessness. You see those 6 groups on your screen. As educators, it's we jump to the top left of that graphic, right? And we see that they found that youth with less than a high school diploma or GED were at the highest risk for experiencing homelessness, 346% more likely than young people with a high school credential. Now, we also see that low-income youth, Black or African-American youth, unmarried parenting youth, Hispanic, non-white youth, and LGBT plus youth are also at disproportionately higher risks of experiencing homelessness. But know that the time and the energy and the investment that you're putting in helping young people complete high school and even move on to post-secondary education, it's time and effort well spent. And then last but not least, this slide here sort of brings home the cyclical nature of the relationship between housing, education, and income and safety nets. If a young person is stably housed, they're more likely to do well in school. Young people who do well in school are more likely to advance academically and then have access to the income and safety nets needed to make a sustainable exit from homelessness, right? This is what is called in the broader educational research field, the education premium. And what the education premium says is that the higher one's level of education, the more likely to have higher income, access to employer-provided benefits, and a whole host of other positive outcomes. Again, so we really want to invest in young people to make sure that they can get the education and skills and credentials they need to secure living wage employment and obtain and remain stable in housing. Before we move on to the McKinney-Vento Act, let me pause for a moment and see if you have any questions or comments about the research that I just shared. You're welcome to unmute or share in the chat. All right. No comments at the moment, and that's okay. I do hope you won't be shy.
I might have one. I was just curious if you know, like with the rural and non-rural students, like that they're statistically identical. Is that like the case in a lot of other states, or do you know that? Or I'd just be curious in comparison.
So this finding from Chapin Hall was at the national level. I don't know that we have Wisconsin specific data from Chapin Hall, but this was sort of averaged across the country. Evelyn, thanks for breaking
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. That's even more interesting.
Yes, absolutely. All right, Evelyn, thanks for breaking the ice. We're going to keep going. Let's actually get into the McKinney-Vento Act. Wait, I see. Okay, can you please go back to the 6 higher risk slide? Sure. I'll pause here for a moment. Again, drawing your attention to the fact that lack of a high school credential is the single largest factor placing youth at risk of experiencing homelessness. If this is information that is of interest to you and you want to refer back to it later, don't forget, Clara posted the link in the chat earlier. We've posted all of our slides on the conference handouts page, and you can actually link to the sources here for more information. All right, let's talk about the McKinney-Vento Act. Here are some basics. The McKinney-Vento Act actually is a broader piece of federal legislation that authorizes housing and supports for people experiencing homelessness. Usually in the field of education, when we say the McKinney-Vento Act, technically we're referring to subtitle 7B of the Act, which is the education subtitle. This subtitle of the Act was reauthorized by Title IX, Part A of the Every Student Succeeds Act that was passed into law at the end of 2015. The overarching purpose of the McKinney-Vento Act is to address the unique educational barriers and challenges faced by students experiencing homelessness. And there are some key people that are part of those efforts, right? So the statute requires that every state education department designate a state coordinator for homeless education. In this case, that's Christine, right, who introduced herself at the beginning of the session today. And then also school districts must designate a local homeless education liaison. Many of you are probably local liaisons. And you guys are the key people at the state and local level to make sure that the McKinney-Vento Act is implemented in Wisconsin public schools. If you are the local liaison, the statute actually includes sort of like a job description of sorts. Now, technically, there are 10 bullet points or 10 duties listed in the statute, but they sort of cluster around topics. And so I've streamlined them a bit here on the slide. The duties of the local liaison include ensuring the identification and school enrollment of students experiencing homelessness, connecting families experiencing homelessness to early childhood services like Head Start, early Head Start, early intervention for young children with disabilities, referring families experiencing homelessness to outside agencies like housing, health, and mental health, right? So the school district does a great job of focusing on education and providing school-based services. But once the student leaves home, they and their family are going to have needs that the school district probably cannot meet. And so the local liaison can help connect students and their families to outside supports. Supporting the informed engagement of parents in the education of their children. Disseminating public notice of McKinney-Vento rights and services. And some of these we're gonna sort of unpack in more detail in the coming slides, so just wanted to mention that. providing professional development to school personnel about homeless education topics, and supporting unaccompanied homeless youth. And we'll talk about what that term means in just a moment. If I had to give you the McKinney-Vento Act's elevator speech, right, the sort of the summary, it actually is included on the front end of the statute. So let's just break it down phrase by phrase. State education departments and school districts must review and revise laws, regulations, practices, or policies, that may act as a barrier to the identification of or the enrollment, attendance, or success in school of children and youth experiencing homelessness. So keep in mind that implementing the McKinney-Vento Act may include changing some things, right? Laws, regulations, practices, or policies, with the overall focus being on removing barriers, educational barriers for children and youth experiencing homelessness. I wanted to get your thoughts based on your observation or just, yeah, your observation and your work. What are some of the educational barriers and challenges that children and youth experiencing homelessness might face? You're welcome to share in the chat or unmute. We'd love to hear your voice.
This is Dave in Chippewa Falls. The biggest challenge we have is probably the most obvious one is simply attendance, right? So it's removing the barriers that students have in getting to school. Because once they're here, right, and this is what I hear from principals across the district is, if they're here, right, we can help, right? We can help. We can provide them with their basic needs and food and clothing and school supplies and all of that. So that the overwhelming kind of barrier is just getting them to school. So it's providing that transportation and doing our best to be creative in what that looks like, but also helping parents understand how necessary it is, right? That despite the challenges that they're having, probably the best place for their kids to be stable is to get them to school, even if there's lots of other things going on. So just thought I'd share. Thanks.
Great, Dave, thank you. Yes, regular, consistent attendance definitely can be an issue for McKinney-Vento students. And actually, I am going to drop a link in the chat. I hope I'm remembering this right. When I was at NCHE, I did author a brief on chronic absenteeism among students experiencing homelessness and strategies for addressing that. So I will drop that in the chat if that's a topic you want to look into more. Looking at people sharing in the chat. Okay, let me scroll. Leah says students are tired from a lack of sleep. That's right. If things are chaotic or stressful outside of school, you're bringing that with you when you come to school, and that could include just being tired, being hungry. Caitlin mentions transportation, lack of internet, right? Inconsistencies, Leah says, and that gets at just the instability. And I'll speak for myself, right? I draw comfort and a sense of security from routine. And when that's interrupted, especially for children, that can affect how they're feeling in school. Attendance, hunger. Students with parents with limited education, limited transportation options, poverty, and language barriers. Thank you, Lisa. Anxiety. Yes, mental health. Mental health can certainly be affected by things happening outside of school. Inability to focus, trauma, lack of resources. Courtney, when survival or basic needs are the priority, it can be difficult to focus on education, right? That's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. All good responses in the chat. Thank you for engaging. This is what research tells us that sort of embodies what we just discussed. So some of the challenges that young people experiencing homelessness might include being unable to meet school enrollment requirements. Many students aren't going to have a typical proof of residence, like someone who's renting an apartment or owns a home. These students move around, and that can mean changing schools. And every time you change schools, there are changes in teachers, changes in routines, in curricula, in books, all of those things. It's a lot of educational disruption. They might be hungry, tired, or anxious. They may not have the supplies needed to do work or even a quiet place to study outside of school. They may not have access to reliable transportation. And if they're an unaccompanied homeless youth, they don't have a parent or guardian there to sign paperwork and to support them along the way. As a result, it's not surprising then that we see some effects on their education: higher rates of chronic absence, lower grades, higher rates of special education needs, lower scores on assessment tests, and even higher rates of dropout. Now, I mention that because it's important to acknowledge the risk and the challenges and the effects of these challenges. But also, I do want to say, it's good for us not to assume that every McKinney-Vento student we meet will show all of these challenges or all of these effects, right? Some McKinney-Vento students are, despite major challenges, very resilient. And so they will be excelling in school, and we don't want to sell them short or have any kind of low expectations for them, but just acknowledging that they're probably dealing with some things outside of school that hopefully we've never had to deal with, and they're bringing that to school with them, and they're going to need a little bit of extra help. And that's what the McKinney-Vento Act is for. Let's talk about the basics. First step. When you're implementing the McKinney-Vento Act, you have to determine if a student is eligible for McKinney-Vento rights and services. So that's something we usually call determining eligibility. This is the process of considering whether a student would be eligible for McKinney-Vento rights and services based on one thing. Does the student's primary nighttime living arrangement meet the McKinney-Vento definition of homeless? And that's what we're going to look at next. So remember, that is what is the determining factor of whether you'll serve a student under the McKinney-Vento Act. Does their nighttime living arrangement meet the definition of homeless? Sorry for the text-heavy slide here, but we'll walk through it step by step. The McKinney-Vento Act uses what is often called the education definition of homelessness that includes a guiding phrase. And it says that children and youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence are considered homeless. So fixed, regular, and adequate is the general standard that we're considering. But then the definition says including, and lists a number of living arrangements that would be considered homeless because they're not fixed, regular, and adequate. Also, I don't know what happened with this weird bullet right here. So sorry about that. It's not anything special. It just got weird. So let's look at those. Let's look at those examples of housing arrangements. So first, sharing the housing of other persons due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason. This is what is called doubled up. Now, when I was at the National Center for Homeless Education, we had webinars solely dedicated to unpacking what it means to be homeless while doubling up, right? So know that this is a session we could talk about this is a topic we could talk about extensively, right? I'll just give you a few tips about doubling up. First of all, look back at the general standard, right? Is this shared housing arrangement fixed, regular, and adequate? You can always look back to that general standard. But then also look at the actual definitional language. Is the shared housing due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason? Because not every shared housing arrangement is homeless, right? Think about roommates or people who decide to move in together for long-term reasons, and it's fixed, regular, and adequate, and it's beneficial to all parties involved. So again, look at that general standard and look at the circumstances surrounding the shared housing. Next, living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, or camping grounds due to the lack of alternative adequate accommodations. Living in emergency or transitional shelters or abandoned in hospitals. Living in a public or private place not designed for people to live. Living in cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, bus or train stations, or similar settings. And migratory children living in the above circumstances. So migrant students are not what we would call categorically eligible for McKinney-Vento, So not every migrant student will be a McKinney-Vento student, but if their living arrangement meets the McKinney-Vento definition, then they would be eligible for McKinney-Vento services. Now let's talk a little bit about unaccompanied homeless youth. This is a topic that can be a little confusing, so let's try to clarify. The statute uses the term unaccompanied youth. Let's look at how that's defined. The term unaccompanied youth includes a homeless child or youth not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. So the custody and guardianship issue is only one piece of the equation. What you're really looking for is that the student's living arrangement meets the McKinney-Vento definition of homeless. That is, again, what is going to open the gate to McKinney-Vento rights and services. So let's break that down again. For a student to be an unaccompanied homeless youth, they must be experiencing homelessness, so their living arrangement meets the definition, and not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. A few eligibility reminders. The local liaison has the authority and responsibility to ensure that eligible students are identified. Now, we're going to look at the actual statutory language in a moment. It is something that the liaison is doing in partnership with the school and the community, but ultimately the liaison has both the authority to make determinations of eligibility and the responsibility to make sure that students are identified. Don't forget to make eligibility determinations on a case-by-case basis, considering the unique circumstances of each student. Now, if a student is staying in shelter, that's an example of an eligibility determination that will be pretty clear cut. But some of those doubled up arrangements, you might need to parse through a little bit, consider the legislative language, the surrounding circumstances, and make a more nuanced determination. Again, pay close attention to the legislative wording, as a lot of times it provides more detail and clarity that we sort of forget is there unless we're really focusing on it. And if eligibility is a topic that you want to dig into, NCHE's determining eligibility brief is very helpful. It breaks down the statute word by word, phrase by phrase, and provides additional questions you can ask for each piece of the definition that you're considering. Let me stop for a second. We're about to look at some data, but I'm realizing sometimes eligibility brings up some questions. Any questions about what I've shared?
I just have one question. I think I kind of know this answer, but so we have a really small school district, and we have just within our school district, we have 3 different trailer parks housing. Now, obviously, if the trailer is, you know, that there's not a whole bunch of people living in there, people have their own room, it's sustainable. Like, I wouldn't think that would meet the definition, but it's very vague on people living in trailer parks. So I guess I just wanted to get some clarification on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually a couple of things. So you're on the right track, Shelby. So again, look at fixed, regular, and adequate. If the trailer is fixed, regular, and adequate, it won't be McKinney-Vento. And I grew up in South Florida, and mobile home parks were very common, and most of those living arrangements would be fixed, regular, and adequate. This, I think, refers more to like pop-up trailers, or I would look at it also under substandard housing. So the example that I often use, prior to working in homeless education, I worked in migrant education and providing direct services to migrant families in Southwest Florida. There was a trailer park behind one of the packing houses that was grower-owned housing for the families. And some of the trailers were in utter disrepair. Like, you would be concerned about the safety of the family living there. I think if it's not fixed, regular, and adequate, or would be substandard housing, then you have a McKinney-Vento case. But for the average mobile home, I would say, no, you wouldn't.
Yeah, we have, like, there's one that the family identifies like, oh yeah, we're good. We live here, you know, it's a pride thing. But the county had determined that as being, I can't remember the term they used, but not suitable for living, kind of a thing. So for that, I would say that's not, that would meet the definition. So
I think you're right. Yep. Your instincts are right. Let me see, looking at a couple of questions in the chat. Does a group home qualify as a shelter? I think you will go back to, is it fixed, regular, and adequate? That's not a super nuanced response, but again, a youth could be placed in a group home for any number of reasons, and the circumstances surrounding their stay there, like, is it long-term, is it fixed, regular, and adequate? Also, I love that we have a dog who's joining us today. I don't know if you guys see. Welcome one and all. Yeah, I really would go back to fixed, regular, and adequate, why the young person was placed there, how long they'll be there. What about 18-year-old unaccompanied homeless seniors? So a student can still be an unaccompanied homeless youth regardless of age, where it gets to be a little simpler actually. Once a young person has reached age of majority, they can sign and provide consent on their own behalf. Prior to that, the district can use any number of strategies for providing consent if a parent or guardian is not available or willing to sign to ensure full school participation for that student. I see Clara is responding to some of the questions in the chat. Let's see. Okay, Diane has a question about transportation. Let's put a pin in that. We're going to talk about transportation next. What if they're living in an RV campground by choice and not by economic hardship or anything like that? I would look at the fixed, I would probably look at the fixed, regular, and adequate piece for that one. Let's see. And then we do have some people crowdsourcing solutions there. Thank you, Stephanie. She talks about gas cards and other transportation options. All right, thanks for your questions. Let's keep going. A little bit of data here, and you can see why understanding that doubled up piece is important. Wisconsin Public Schools enrolled 13,450 McKinney-Vento students in the 2020-21 school year. 1,522 of those were unaccompanied homeless youth. And then you see along the right, the breakdown by primary nighttime residents. 3/4 of the students identified were doubling up. Then you have 13% were in shelter, 10% staying in hotels or motels, and 2% unsheltered. So just know that a lot of the students you encounter will be in that doubled up category, in part because keep in mind, a lot of communities, what people often think of as homeless, they think of homeless shelters, but a lot of communities don't have a shelter. They might be full. Families may have concerns about the shelter environment. And so a lot of times it's that doubled up, hey, can I stay with you? I don't have anywhere else to go. And sometimes those arrangements end up working out okay, but a lot of times they're very unstable and can unravel because of changes to, right? The host family may say, I might get in trouble if I have people who are staying here with me, you're not on the lease, or this is creating, you know, it's feeling really crowded, this is creating friction in my family, or I don't know that I can take on this financial responsibility. And so those things, those arrangements may not be stable. Now, a little bit of YRBS, or Youth Risk Behavior Survey data, just to kind of get you thinking about identification. And Christine did acknowledge on the front end of today that Wisconsin schools, or many, are likely under identifying students. What YRBS found, YRBS is a survey, a school-based survey that is administered at least every 2 years. It is overseen by the CDC, and some school districts opted to include questions about homelessness in the survey. And so that's the data that you're looking at. Based on YRBS homelessness data, public schools are identifying slightly less than half of high school students experiencing homelessness. So the prevalence of homelessness among high schoolers based on YRBS data was 5.8%, whereas the public school identification rate currently is at 2.27%. So just know that it's likely that schools are under identifying students, and so making sure that you are complying with McKinney-Vento requirements around identification. And really not just because of requirements and statute, but also because you know that these students may need extra supports and you want to make sure that they get them. All right, let's pause, let's take a breath. Let's have a look at a scenario here. where you can apply your knowledge. So Alexa Carter has been working as a server at a local restaurant for 3 years. The restaurant struggled to maintain business during the pandemic. Alexa's hours had been cut to the point where she could no longer afford the apartment where she and her 12-year-old daughter, Crystal, had been living. Alexa asked her manager, Sharon, if she and Crystal could stay in her spare bedroom. Sharon said they could stay there until her son comes home from college for winter break. What are your thoughts? Would you deem Crystal eligible for McKinney Vento services? Why or why not? You can share in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute, you're welcome to unmute. I'm seeing some questions come up in the chat also. We'll get to those in just a moment. Okay, so Chrissy says, yes, not fixed. Yes, the financial barrier to housing, and this is temporary. Yes, they are doubled up due to economic hardship. Yes, this is not a fixed placement. Yes, 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 lots of yeses. All right, anybody feel like, I don't know, I'm not sure, or no, it's okay if you have a differing opinion. Okay. So it looks like most of you are saying yes, doubled up. Let me just debrief that. I would agree with you. First of all, looking at the fixed, regular, and adequate standard, we know that this is a temporary arrangement. Sharon has said, yes, you can stay, but only until my son comes home for winter break. That's probably in a couple of months, right? If we're in October here, that's in a couple of months. And then also we know that Alexa and her daughter lost housing and they're sharing someone else's housing due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason, right? So this is a relatively clear-cut, doubled up housing, homeless situation. All right, let's pause for questions. Let me scroll. I remember seeing some a minute ago. Let's see. Just a second. You mentioned, hold on just a minute. Ashley, Christina, you mentioned doubled up as being something that could be dedicated to a discussion all of its own. Are there any recorded conversations on this topic? I have multiple doubled up situations that I would like some clarification on. So a few things you can do. I do see that Clara mentioned that on the DPI website, there are additional resources related to doubled up. A couple of other things that you can do. You could always reach out to Christine or Clara for thought partnership on processing different scenarios. The National Center for Homeless Education has a helpline. I'm going to mention that. I'm going to put that in the chat. You can call or email them. I also offer my email inbox to you if you would like to email me. But then NCHE, when I was there, now it's been close to a year since I was there, they had a webinar specifically called Understanding Doubled Up that they would offer about every 3 or 4 months. So you can check the NCHE website, see if they have nchc.ed.gov, see if they have a doubled up session coming up soon. And if not, they probably have it recorded somewhere. Diane says, does McKinney Vento eligibility continue throughout the year if the family has been able to move into their own fixed, regular, and adequate home? Short answer, yes, absolutely. So if a student loses housing in October, but moves back and the students are deemed McKinney Vento eligible, but finds permanent housing, say in April, those students still have all their McKinney Vento rights until the end of that school year. And then you would reconsider eligibility at the time of enrollment for the next school year to see, are they still permanently housed or have they lost housing and would still be considered McKinney Vento eligible? Just looking to see if I missed other questions. I know there's some about transportation, which we'll get to shortly. Okay, so I do see some questions like, how long can a family be considered homeless as doubled up? So this actually is a good segue from the previous question. Remember that if a student begins doubling up in October, they are going to have McKinney Vento eligibility and access to McKinney Vento rights and services for the remainder of the school year. You could then reconsider the student's eligibility at the beginning of the next school year. There's no hard and fast rule for how long a student can be considered doubled up. I just think you would want to have a conversation with the family explaining, hey, I'm having a conversation just to see what's happening now, and ask them a few questions, but and then you have to make a determination, is something that was initially not fixed, regular, and adequate, has it become fixed, regular, and adequate? Okay, I'm looking at the time. Let's keep going, but we will stop for questions in again. Let me check how we're doing with the time. We're actually doing pretty good. All right, let's talk about identification. Identification is a theme, a responsibility that is woven throughout the McKinney-Vento Act. And in fact, for those of you who are receiving American Rescue Plan, Homeless Children and Youth Funds, many districts are receiving those ARP HCY funds. Identification is a major theme of those funds as well. Identification is the first step to ensuring educational access and success for students experiencing homelessness. Going back to remember the liaison job duties, the liaison job description, liaisons must ensure that homeless children and youth are identified by school personnel through outreach and coordination with other entities and agencies. So liaisons have the ultimate responsibility, but this is not something that really can or should be happening just with the liaison, right? It would be difficult for the liaison to have eyes and ears, so to speak, throughout all schools in the district and then places in the community as well. So remember that this is something that should be done in partnership with other school personnel, with your community partners. So that's part of that responsibility to provide professional development. Are you training school social workers, school counselors, classroom teachers, transportation personnel, community partners? Are you sharing with them what it means to be homeless according to the McKinney-Vento definition? What you want them to do. Hey, if you notice that a student in your class is showing common signs of homelessness, please refer them to me following these steps, right? You might, especially if you're a larger district, some larger school districts have online forms like a Google form, where when they're training community partners, they say, if you have a student or a family you believe might be McKinney-Vento eligible, fill out this form and it'll come right to me and I can reach out to the family. So make sure that you're not just expecting that you as the liaison will be the only eyes and ears, but that identification is something that is happening in partnership with the school and community. One clear responsibility that liaisons have related to identification is making sure that public notice of homeless students' rights is posted in an understandable manner throughout the schools in the district and the community. Now, the statute mentions specific places like laundromats, food banks, but you may post those posters in a number of places throughout the district and your community. In fact, I'll invite you in the chat, if this is something you're already doing, which hopefully you are, share where you post these posters. Right? Where is it that you're posting public notice of homeless students' rights? Now, if this is something you're not doing, I'm going to flag this for you as a next step, because again, this is a statutory requirement, and both NCHE and Schoolhouse Connection have educational rights posters available to you. You can just print them out and post them wherever you need them. Also, you can order NCHE posters in hard copy for free up to like 25, and they have English versions, Spanish versions, parent versions, and youth versions. Immediate school enrollment is one of the key rights. Under the McKinney-Vento Act, children and youth experiencing homelessness have the right to immediate school enrollment, even if lacking paperwork normally required for enrollment. Some of that paperwork that may be lacking includes birth certificate, proof of residence, previous school records, or immunization or health records. And remember, students must be immediately enrolled, even if they don't have a parent or legal guardian present and can't provide typical proof of guardianship. That's for our unaccompanied homeless youth. Enrollment is defined in the statute as attending classes and participating fully in school activities. So we wouldn't want to see a situation where the student is enrolled on the student roster, but is like in a separate classroom awaiting, XYZ, or not allowed to attend, right? Enrollment means full school participation, just like all other students attending school. What you're looking at here is one of the hallmarks of the McKinney-Vento Act, the right to school selection and transportation. And I know we had some questions about that, so we'll circle back to the transportation piece. Children and youth experiencing homelessness have the right to attend either their school of origin or their local attendance area school. And these terms are defined in statute. So the school of origin is the school that a child or youth attended when permanently housed, or the school in which the child or youth was last enrolled. So technically a student could have two schools of origin and would have the right to attend either. If a student was identified immediately at the time that they lost housing, this definition is likely to indicate the same school, right? But again, remember that if a student's been moving around a lot and may not have been identified by the school until a couple of moves in, they might have two different schools of origin. The student can also attend the local attendance area school, which we got a lot of legalese here. I'll say the legal definition and then use more common language. So the local school is any public school that non-homeless students who live in the attendance area in which the child or youth is actually living are eligible to attend. Usually this is the neighborhood school. If I live at XYZ address, what school am I zoned to attend? The exception would be a school district that has open enrollment policies. There might be multiple schools then that would meet the definition of local school. School of origin transportation must be provided at the request of the parent or guardian, or in the case of an unaccompanied homeless youth, at the request of the local liaison. So if it is deemed to be in a student's best interest to continue attending the school of origin, if needed, the district has the responsibility to provide that transportation. So I just mentioned if it's in a student's best interest to continue attending the school of origin. Well, how is that determined? And what does the McKinney-Vento Act tell us about that? The McKinney-Vento Act, the way I describe it, does tip the scales, if you want to put it that way, tips the scales towards the school of origin. It says that a district shall presume that keeping the child or youth in the school of origin is in the child's or youth's best interest, except when doing so is contrary to the request of the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied homeless youth. The statute also says that it is important to consider student-centered factors related to the student's best interest, factors like the impact of mobility on achievement, education, health, and safety, and then reiterating, right, giving priority to the request of the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied homeless youth. So we see a clear tipping of the scales towards school of origin, but I will mention there may be some cases where a parent or the student may want to enroll in the local school. Maybe they weren't having a great experience at the school of origin, or they said, you know what, we don't anticipate moving back to the previous area. We'd like to go ahead and get engaged in the local school. Or, for any number of reasons, a family may say, we think it's better for the student to enroll in the local school. But just remember that a best interest determination should be made, giving priority to the request of the parent, guardian, or youth. And again, presuming school of origin is in the best interest of the student. Okay, I see some questions coming in the chat. Let's have a scenario here first, and then we will stop for questions. Remember Alexa and Crystal Carter? After learning more about their situation, you deemed Crystal McKinney-Vento eligible. They're staying with Alexa's manager, who lives in an area zoned for a different middle school than the one Crystal was attending. Does Crystal have the right to continue attending her middle school? And how would you go about determining which school is in Crystal's best interest? You can share your thoughts in the chat or over audio. Does Crystal have the right to continue attending her middle school, and how would you go about figuring out best interest? Yes, she has the right to continue. It's in her best interest because the situation is temporary, so we'd want to keep her at her school of origin. Yes, discuss where she plans to look for new housing. Yes, she does. Discuss with parent for their preference. That's right, Kim. Let's remember that we're going to presume school of origin is in Crystal's best interest, but let's have a conversation. I'll give another example. Sometimes if there's a safety issue that may be at play, maybe an issue of domestic violence, you may have a parent say, I want my child to enroll in the local school, right? So just remember it's worth a conversation. All of this to say it's worth a conversation. Talk about how changing schools could affect Crystal, see what Crystal and her mom think. Yes, determine best interest through a conversation with the family. Yep. To stay with her friends. I will speak to the parent. Okay. So Kim is saying best interest determine. Oh, BID, best interest determination. Okay. Yeah. That's right. So have a conversation and see what Crystal and the mom are thinking. But if they want her to continue attending the school of origin, she does have that right. Let me stop here for questions, and I'm going to scroll because I remember seeing one. Someone asked, what if attendance in school of origin is affected because of distance to the school of origin? So that is reasonable to consider, right? If it's a really long commute and maybe the student isn't showing up for transportation regularly, or if you already know, like for a kindergartner who maybe doesn't have a real strong connection to their school of origin yet, maybe having a long commute for them would be a deterrent or could affect school attendance. Now, for a high school senior whose ability to graduate could be affected, or there's a deep connection to the school, a longer commute might make sense. But yes, if a student is not attending regularly, they're not showing up for transportation, you could have a conversation with the family and that could affect best interest. Okay.
Christina, there was another question right above that. If our public charter school does not provide busing, can it go to the district public school and seek transportation for a child to our school?
So if the public charter is the student's school of origin, transportation must be provided, even if it's not provided to other students. And it would be the responsibility, ultimately under the statute, right? It is the responsibility of the public charter. Now, if the student has moved into another school district, then it would be a partnership between the public charter and where the district where the student is staying. Where it looks a little different is if the student is attending the public charter as the local school, not as the school of origin, then transportation falls under comparable services. So if it is provided to other students, it must be provided to the McKinney Vento student. If it's not, and again, it is the student's local school, then it's not required, but you could, as a best practice, connect that student to transportation resources or provide transportation. Let's see. Okay, so Brian has shared. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask about the transportation piece. So if you have a family who's within walking distance that's deemed, under McKinney Vento, are they eligible for busing, or do they have to walk just like any other kiddo?
I would say unless there is, short answer, comparable services, if they're within the walk zone, the student would walk. The only exception that I would say that I've heard, and districts have viewed it as we are removing barriers as required by statute, is like if it's a young child and they have to cross like a major thoroughfare and it's not safe and the parent can't walk them. So I would say comparable services unless there is a pretty significant barrier that would make it difficult for the student to get to school on their own. Cold weather language barriers. Okay. All right. Let's see. I think there's a question here about eligibility. I'll cover this question and then we'll keep moving. So Brian says, a family has been living in the school district for 4 years. They were living in fixed regular housing. They then moved out of the country last April. Only the school-age child returned at the end of September and is currently living with an aunt and uncle. There is a possibility of the parents returning back. I think the question is, would the student be McKinney-Vento eligible? I think you have to consider, is the living arrangement with aunt and uncle fixed, regular, and adequate? Do you know why the student came back? Have aunt and uncle committed to housing the student for a period of time? So I would go back to the fixed, regular, and adequate issue and why the student is sharing housing with the aunt and uncle. Okay, what if we disagree? What if usually what will happen is the disagreement comes if the parent or the unaccompanied youth says, I believe it's in the student's best interest to stay in the school of origin, and the school district says, we think local school is better. If the district determines that it is not in the student's best interest to attend the school requested by the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied homeless youth, the statute outlines what are called dispute resolution procedures, and there are specific steps the district must take. The district must provide the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied homeless youth with a written explanation for the reasons of its determination. That written explanation must be in a manner and form understandable to the parent, guardian, or unaccompanied youth. And it must include information about the parent, guardian, or youth's right to appeal the district decision. Now, as these steps are playing out, and what usually will happen is the dispute will begin at the district level. If it is appealed, it would then go up to the state level. That doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen sometimes. But while all this is playing out, the student must be immediately enrolled in the school in which enrollment is sought, pending final resolution of the dispute, including all available appeals. All right, we're doing good on time. Remember how I mentioned that the removal of barriers is part of the elevator speech of the McKinney-Vento Act, and it does include a broad and ongoing mandate to remove barriers to the student's identification, enrollment, and success in school. But then under EHCY, the Every Student Succeeds Act, we saw even more specific language about types of barriers that must be removed. So let's look at those in a little bit more detail. First, districts must address barriers related to outstanding fees or fines or absences. They must ensure that students receive appropriate credit for full or partial coursework satisfactorily completed at a prior school. And I will note that Wisconsin, that DPI does include guidance documents on the DPI website specifically related to awarding partial credit. So that's helpful that you have a state-specific resource on that. And then also districts must address barriers for these students accessing academic and extracurricular activities, including magnet school, summer school, career and technical education, advanced placement, online learning, and charter school programs. Let's talk a little bit about higher education also. So we saw, sorry, I'm just muting some lines here. All right. We saw new language under EHCY, right, which reauthorized the McKinney-Vento Act about higher education access and success. Firstly, we saw new language that school counselors must assist students experiencing homelessness with college preparation and readiness. And actually our program's non-regulatory guidance. So I don't know if you've heard of non-regulatory guidance. That is sort of a supplementary resource that the U.S. Department of Education released that helps to fill in the blanks between what is not, between statutory language and what may not be explicitly shared in statute. And one of the things that they say is that school counselors must provide individualized attention to students experiencing homelessness, and actually give some specific things they should be focusing on, like choosing a post-secondary pathway, accessing financial aid, filling out the free application for federal student aid. So if you're not partnering with your school counselors yet, that might be a next step that you could jot down for yourself. Then also local liaisons must inform unaccompanied homeless youth about their independent student status on the free application for federal student aid and assist with verification of this status. Does anyone want to, either in the chat or over audio, share what does it mean for a student to be considered independent on the FAFSA?
When you're independent on the FAFSA, you have to on the FAFSA form, when you're checking the boxes on a certain location, you either have to be a parent of a child, you have to qualify for McKinney Vento homelessness, military, and then they've added now something new this year where, and I'm not sure exactly, but it's something where you are independent from the parent, but not considered McKinney Vento. And I have to research more of that. It came up in a financial aid night that I had for the kids. And so, but there's like 4, possibly 5 different boxes that if you check one of those, you do qualify for the independent status.
That's right. Thank you, Christine. So Christine is reminding us that there are a number of categories of independent students. So if you're a veteran or active in the military, if you are a parent, right, with dependent children, if you were in foster care at age 13 or older, if you are an unaccompanied homeless youth, if you reached age 24, there might be a couple of other categories, or a student can be deemed independent through what's called a dependency override. And as many people are sharing in the chat, what that means is if a student is independent, there's no involvement of the parents on the FAFSA. They don't need a parent's signature. They don't need a parent anything. And the parent's income and assets are not factored in when the student's financial aid is determined, right? There's a formula that is used to calculate financial aid. And for independent students, it is only the student's income and assets that are included in that formula. So that's a really key support for unaccompanied homeless youth who may not be in relationship with their parent or guardian. And so they wouldn't even be able to provide parent information, and they won't be receiving any financial support from their parent for pursuing higher education. Let's have a scenario, then we'll stop for questions, and we're nearing the end of our session, so we're right on time. Summer is approaching. Crystal did okay in school this year, but would benefit from attending her school's summer reading enrichment program. The school says she can't enroll in the program until she pays a fine related to a lost internet hotspot that was issued to help with remote learning during the pandemic. Crystal's mom, Alexa, says she's looked all over for the hotspot, but it must have gotten lost or left behind when they got evicted. She doesn't have the money to pay the fine, but doesn't want Crystal to miss out on the reading assistance. How would you address the issue of the hotspot fine? You can share in the chat or unmute and share over audio.
I would think like most schools get funding for homelessness, right? So like, I would think that this would be a perfect scenario to use some of that funding to pay for that.
Yeah, that would certainly be an allowable use. It could be an allowable use of McKinney-Vento subgrant funds if your district gets those funds. It could be paid for out of ARP EHCY funds. I'm also seeing, remember that statute says that you have to remove barriers related to outstanding fees and fines, but it doesn't say exactly how. So the district does have some discretion. They can pay the fine from any number of sources. They can waive the fine. They can reduce the fine. Title I Part A set aside funds. Sarah says we would use our hardship funds and pay for it, right? So your district may have other sources of funds. In this case, maybe hardship funds. So again, you can waive it or you can pay it, but you do need to remove that barrier due to that outstanding fee or fine. I just want to give a quick shout out. We have a higher education partner joining us, Tawny. She says, I work at UW Milwaukee and we have a specific program to serve unaccompanied homeless youth called Fostering Success at UWM. Love that, Tawny. Thank you for sharing. Jillian and I from Schoolhouse Connection, we're going to talk about higher education in a session later this afternoon. Tawny, we'd love to have you join us, but just remember that there are institutions of higher education that are starting to pay more attention to this issue of basic needs and security among students, and so may have campus-based supports. If you're a local liaison, that's a good topic to explore so that when you have seniors who are graduating and pursuing higher education, you can let them know there may be some specific supports for you available at this institution. Let's get you connected. All right. What questions do you have about anything that we've discussed thus far? And I see Jenny's raised her hand. Jenny, you're welcome to unmute and share your question.
Hello, thank you. So I know that some districts and counties are moving away from the language of using parent guardian and switching to parent caregiver, more trauma-informed way of saying that. So would that change the way that we consider if a youth is unaccompanied or not? And I think about Brian's comment. So like if aunt and uncle have agreed to be the caregiver for kiddo, would he still be an unaccompanied youth? Does that make sense?
Here's where we're bumping into like trauma-informed language versus legal mandates. So in the case of Brian, it's helpful to use a specific example. The reason that I think parent or guardian is mentioned specifically in the statute is because there are legal ramifications for that term, right? And one of the main goals is to make sure that an unaccompanied homeless youth can engage fully in school, even if they don't have someone with a legal standing to provide proof of guardianship, which is a legal standing, right? Or to consent to certain things. And so the student could still be considered an unaccompanied homeless youth if, again, going back to the language of the statute, if they're not under not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. So I think you're on the right track for trauma-informed language, but for purposes of McKinney-Vento, it's more about legal status and who can provide consent. Now, if you deemed that that student was McKinney-Vento eligible, they're going to have access to school just like any other student would. The statute doesn't say that districts have to address full school participation for unaccompanied homeless youth in a specific way. So usually we see one of three ways that districts respond to that issue of the need for a signature or consent. They either allow the student to sign for themselves, they allow the liaison to sign, or they allow a caregiver, oftentimes using a caregiver affidavit. So I like where you're headed. Just in the case of the McKinney-Vento Act, it's more about legal stuff, if that makes sense. Okay. Other questions or comments in the chat or over audio?
I have a question. This is Diane Meredith. So I'm back where I'm the one that we're at a public charter school within the larger city public school district. We've had some situations with transportation because we don't provide transportation at our school, no busing or anything. We've offered bus passes and gas cards if the parent has a means of transportation or someone they know who could use the gas card to get their child to school. However, most of the time there is no means of transportation available, and the bus pass is very inconvenient for the parent who has younger children at home or the child's special needs, and to get them back and forth to school every day is a problem. So I don't know if I'm asking if this is a way to get around the barrier of transportation by, we don't like to suggest anybody to leave our school, but maybe the local public school or neighborhood school in walking distance to this family would be in their best interests. How would you go about handling this situation?
Sure. Diane, before you mute back, just a quick question. Is your public charter and a school district, not only a school, but a school district unto itself, or is it considered a school within the broader district?
It's a district unto itself.
Okay.
And I apologize, I don't have my camera on. I can't get it to work. It was working, it's not working now.
No problem. So you may not love my answer, but I'm going to tell you what the McKinney-Vento Act says. So the best interest is about the student, right? Remember that the statute says student-centered factors. So it wouldn't really be allowed or in keeping with the McKinney-Vento Act to say, we're having a hard time providing transportation, so we deem that to not be in the student's best interest. The statute is clear. If it is in the student's best interest to stay in the school of origin, the district has to provide transportation. You could get creative. I do know some school districts use ride share. If that's allowed in your state, there are some services like Hop, Skip, Drive. Some districts will even use cabs. It could be more expensive than gas cards, but I don't know. Let me just invite people in the chat to share how they've handled tricky. Okay, Clara is saying rideshare is allowable, so you can consider using rideshare services. Michelle's saying we use Go Kid Go. Okay, so that's a transportation service. I've heard of Hop Skip Drive. I've heard there's another one. There are a number of services that are popping up that are like rideshare, but specifically for schools. So the responsibility is still there. You just have flexibility with how you need it. That might not be the answer you wanted, but that is what the McKinney-Vento Act would say. Now, if the student has moved into another district, then you are at least partnering with that district to provide transportation. Clara, I'm going to open it up to if you wanted to add anything. Oh, Clara says, have you connected with the homeless liaisons at Minneapolis? Wait, not Minneapolis. I don't know what MPS is. What's MPS?
Milwaukee.
Milwaukee Public.
Yeah, I would, and you probably have, Diane. I would imagine reaching out to the other local school district or school districts that the student is in could be helpful. I do know that some people were suggesting something like Go Kid Go or Hop Skip Drive, or there's other ones I know that are out there that I don't know the names of. But yeah, you could start there if you haven't already.
I'm realizing we're about at time, so let me just move to close us out. I'd love to ask you, what is one thing you learned today or one next step you'll take as a result of today's session? Love to have you share that in the chat. I'm going to make a quick suggestion that's relatively easy, but also is a requirement. If you haven't posted rights of students publicly, that is a requirement of statute. Go to the slides, download those educational rights posters from NCHE or Schoolhouse and post them throughout the district and community. Okay, let's see. Connection of posters, get public postings out. Yes. Identification. So Christy's saying, going to focus more on identification, more community connections. And we're going to talk about school community partnerships tomorrow. Make this information more accessible. Posters. Yes, post the rights. Something new. Yeah, go ahead, Clara.
I do want to share one thing. Thank you so much for talking about posters. We do have a lot of different resources besides the downloadable versions that we talked about before on the DPI website. We do have a couple other like examples from school districts, and we have something that you could post in a newspaper or other places that you would post notices for the school. So I will put a link in here to some of our example forms as well. This would be under like a staff awareness or community awareness.
Thanks, Clara. And that's a great segue to, well, and I want to say, Javon mentioned, I learned more about youth who are at high risk for homelessness. Remember that education is a key way to intervene in that cycle of homelessness and poverty. We do want to make sure you're aware that there are lots of resources available from DPI, Schoolhouse Connection, NCHE, and the U.S. Department of Education. Don't forget to click those links in the slides, and Clara has shared the handouts link multiple times, so hopefully you have those handy now. And I want to thank you for joining, for being active in the conversation. My inbox is open to you if you have any questions. Thanks for making it a great session. I think we're going to be kicked out. We're going to be kicked out and back to the main session any moment now. So take a breath, and I'll see you back in the main room momentarily.